Hi, I'm Doris Purchase, and welcome to Beyond the Frame, a podcast created just for you by Propeller Art Gallery, artists empowering artists in Toronto. Together, we'll take a deep dive into the hearts and minds of working visual artists today and their practice. In each episode, you will hear illuminating and intimate explorations of all things art, and you'll hear it in the artist's own voice. We'll talk process, inspiration, challenges, and much more. Everything you've ever wanted to know about art making or about the artists themselves happens right here. So let's sit back and have a listen, shall we? Today we welcome Joseph Muscat. Which ism is it? Under which ism would you classify your work?
Well, I've always been hesitant about labeling or pigeonholing my work. It's uncomfortable for me to block myself in a corner and feel like I have to live up to it, and then you can never leave. So I think isms are for art historians who usually like to put things in boxes and then challenge you when you do something different. I've never been keen on typecasting, and I must have moved across many isms in my lifetime, and that I know has cost me a number of opportunities in commercial galleries who I think like to ism you and identify you by a particular style and shun you if you ever veer out of that style. So I remember earlier on in my career, being connected to a gallery in Toronto who dropped me when I returned from a trip to India, and I changed my palette completely and my technique and my sensibility, and how could I not? So a more direct answer to the question would be eclecticism. So that would be where I would frame my work, in being very eclectic.
Who's your muse? Influencers, educators, mentors, who has greatly inspired you?
I think experiences have inspired me more than any one person has. My travels, my life's trajectory, my partner, my family, my formative years growing up in a Mediterranean culture, some teachers, some friends, even some of my own students. There have been a number of individuals who have believed in me, encouraged me, urged me on. There was one teacher at the Ontario College of Art, Francois Tepeau, who was a great inspiration and a role model. Several colleagues of mine have also been, at some point in time, a source of great inspiration. And I did have an affinity for the European Surrealist movement in my formative years. René Magritte, de Chirico, Joan Miro. I also enjoyed the Fauvists, the wild beasts like Georges Rouault, or our very own Quebec's Alfred Pellan. And I had an affair with Der Blau Reiter, the Blue Rider group, like Franz Marc and Kandinsky. But Picasso was the perfect example of eclecticism for me. His work was diverse, and his styles varied over his long lifetime. Ultimately, with so much traveling under my belt, so many visits to museums and galleries, books I've read, and people I've encountered, the influences, subtle or not so subtle, are all synthesized in defining my artistic output.
Materials matter. What are your chosen favorite tools and preferred medium?
Well, one of my challenges during my 40-plus year career as an artist has always been making choices when it comes to art making. I love all materials, paper and paint, no doubt, but my attention is often scattered because I see possibilities in just about any material. I've painted in oils, watercolor, gouache, but my longtime material of choice has been acrylic on a variety of surfaces: canvas, paper, tar paper, wood, metal, and even glass. I've worked with silkscreen lithography, photography, and above all, mixed media. This is my reigning choice. I love putting together different materials and see how they interact. I really also dig three-dimensional constructions, which once in a while I work in. And I work with natural materials such as wood and stone, as well as manufactured and industrial ones like steel, glass, plexiglass, again, tar paper, and found objects. Luckily, I have a fully equipped workshop outside of my studio, and at one point, I was even making my own frames. So, and also one time in my life, I wanted to own a hardware store. That's how much I enjoy tools and, hardware materials. I've even, with my eclecticism, I have even produced a couple of videos. One was an experimental work that was actually presented in a new media show at Le Laboda in 2005. And in 2003, I produced a 30-minute documentary on a show I curated at the John Beard Gallery called 7 Canadian Artists of Maltese Origin. So to wrap it up, as you can see, I don't shy away from experimenting and from trying different things.
Slump Secrets. What methods do you employ to get yourself out of a slump?
Well, my slumps are usually intentional, as in taking a break. So again, travel when we could, even just outside of the immediate environment, is already a good way to get away from the studio. I have a cottage up in Madawaska. It's a great place for recharging, as nature inspires me like no other. Even cleaning my studio is a good way to kind of clearing my head. But my constant secret is to always go to my studio and just putter, sit around, and look at things, past and present, and play with no real necessary goal or agenda. So through play, I discover new terrain, I solve problems, and usually feel at peace with the world. It has never been a problem for me to create, thank goodness, and I've never run out of ideas. On the contrary, I often despair that I cannot do all the things I dream about or that I note down in my sketchbooks. So, as a word of advice perhaps to others, one sure solution to never get a painter's block, if you're prone to it, is to work on more than one thing at a time, because sometimes choosing a color, say for a particular work, might prompt you to apply it to another work, which may have been causing some difficulties and thus breaking down the impasse and helping you to move along.
In the beginning. So tell me a bit about your process. Do you have a bag of tricks, lucky talismans, or habits? Where do you start? And more importantly, when do you stop?
I have a faithful repertoire of images that I draw from, and I have been drawing from them ever since I graduated from Muscat. They have followed me my entire career. I can pick any of these, often symbolic images, and explore different possibilities. That way, I have no excuse of ever running out of ideas. And for me, it's hard to gauge when and where I've started something, because quite often the process is in a continuum. I've used, for instance, the ladder, the motif of the cabin, clouds. These are recurring images that really kind of push me through and find different meaning from day to day or from week to week or year to year. Now, I usually stop when I feel I've exhausted my interest in a particular subject. or when the process feels forced or disingenuous. Occasionally, when I think I'm through with something, I find myself later revisiting it and opening it up to new possibilities. So, as you can see, there are no straight answers, as I think all art should be mysterious. Art should ask questions and not provide answers.
Calling all emo. What do you wish people to think or feel when they contemplate your work?
First and foremost, I wish that the work moves the viewer. That is, that it hits a nerve enough that they take the time to look and, like you said, to contemplate. Whatever they come up with is their prerogative. But when they feel that a work of art has captured their heart or mind or both and respond accordingly, this is music to my ears. Even if the message they get from it is totally opposite from my intended one, I still like the response. I like to tell the story of Mel Lastman. In the 1980s, when I first moved into this area in North York, he put out a competition for some artwork for his mayoral office in North York. So I did a triptych painting of an old Victorian building. There was a hardware store, Dempsey's hardware store, that was destined to be moved, and new buildings and the subway to come in. So this was at the corner of Yonge and Shepherd. So I did this painting where Dempsey's Victorian hardware store slowly morphed into a characterless concrete building that was to be the Shepherd Center. So my message was one of regret, sacrificing a beautiful historical building to new, somewhat boring commercial structures. It was a criticism of Lastman's development frenzy. But Mel Lastman, however, saw it as a glorifying statement for his development mission. He thought I was, suggesting that it was a great idea, that he was developing the whole city. So the message was lost, but my painting landed in his office and is now in the City of Toronto's permanent collection. So, moral of the story, the viewer has the final say, but that does not change what I've created.
The struggle is real. Talk to me about your biggest challenges as an artist. What methods do you use to overcome these challenges?
Well, when I decided to commit to a career as a visual artist, I also decided to make sure that I'm self-sufficient, to be able to do what I want and still be able to pay the rent and even have a family. So I taught art in high school and even university, always part-time, for 35 years. That gave me a secure income, and I never looked back. So when I taught, I always told my students to embrace challenges, but I also warned them to also secure a second money-earning career with their art making, and to try to make that second career meaningful and relevant. So that's the secret to holding on to your art career without becoming impoverished or without selling out or, God forbid, without giving it up. So I embrace challenges because I think this is what drives the artist. And as an example, again, when my kids were young, preschool, I used to look after them every afternoon after my morning teaching. And while my spouse went to work, I loved that challenge. And as soon as they could walk and hold a pencil or a brush, they were in my studio and all three of us would be playing artists. So I've been lucky that I've never joined the ranks of starving artists. After all, how much art can one produce if one's stomach is empty? So challenges are good. We're in the middle of a challenge right now with this pandemic. And I think for a lot of artists, COVID has been a godsend because it's forced them to do nothing but be alone in their studio working.
Picture perfect. In your opinion, what constitutes a perfect piece of art? And what qualities in your own work would you signify as a perfect work? For example, perfect composition, confident brushstrokes illustrating a concept, or something else altogether.
Perfect is a loaded word and perhaps not the best goal to pursue. Doing the best you can is more my style. Challenging myself beyond my comfort zone is the way I go about doing my artwork. Now, there are times when I feel disappointed or disheartened by something I might be working on. I feel disappointed sometimes with a certain painting or a certain work and question whether I've given it all. One has to also look at the circumstances one is in at the time and not take the easy way out or give up. Now, I know friends who have given up their musical talents, for instance, because they realize they don't have a chance at becoming a concert pianist. There's a fine balance between being self-critical and acknowledging your accomplishments. It comes with time and experience. One also has to be tough-skinned and not take to heart outside criticism, which is sometimes unsolicited and cruel. I've had a few tough attacks on my art from media critics. It is jarring at first, and it hits hard. But at least I feel I'm being noticed, better than being ignored. I invest a lot of myself, as I'm sure most artists do, in my own artwork. So obviously, I enjoy hearing the praises, but I'm not easily rattled by criticism.
Art Speak. How do you feel about titling, discussing, and explaining your work?
Titling used to be one of my pet peeves, not because I don't enjoy titling, but over the years, I noticed that oftentimes viewers relied on the title of a work to derive meaning from it. I sometimes hesitate talking about my work because the work speaks for itself. But there are times when I enjoy discussing my work with an enthusiastic audience in a teaching sort of way. I guess I'm less interested in just doing all the thinking for the viewer, especially when I'm asked, what are you trying to say? Before they take the time to find out for themselves. So literal titling is boring. It reminds me of Magritte's quip of "Ceci n'est pas une pipe." Everybody knows that painting, this is not a pipe. Titling a large canvas, sporting a big smoking pipe. So having said all that, I do title my work and I do spend meaningful time doing this, usually after the work is completed. I enjoy infusing the title with wit, whimsy, and jeu de mots. And although my titles are never literal descriptions of what they portray, they often have a connection to the content, be it historical or experiential, but always with a twist.
Heavy metal or classical? What do you listen to while you work? Or is silence your thing?
I listen to music, all kinds of music, when I'm working, depending on the mood I'm in or the work I'm concentrating on. But I also enjoy talk shows, ideas on CBC podcasts. I find having a multisensorial experience when I'm working very energizing. And sometimes what I'm listening to, concept or concert, filters into my work in some mysterious way. Then again, there are times when I embrace silence and quiet. I also turn off my phone so I'm not distracted, but that's not always practical or doable.
Why for art, though? Why do you make art?
You saved the hardest question and the best question for last. Maybe if you ask a number of individuals, professionals, tradesmen, they might tell you because of the monetary gains or prestige or calling. For an artist, it's certainly not for the money. As art making sucks more money out of you than it pays. For me, the motive is pure and simple because I have to because I need to. Producing something out of nothing is a powerful force, a drive, a responsibility, an addiction that has no cure. Look at Monet, for instance, who was going blind with cataracts, but he persisted with his painting and created some of his best work in that state, the Water Lily series. Or Matisse, who was in a wheelchair and bedridden with arthritis in his later years, and still insisted on painting using a long stick with a brush strapped to his hand. And he painted from his bed. And there are others who did exactly the same thing. Now, I'm not comparing myself with these giants of art, but I share a common thread with them. I paint because I have to, and I hope to die with a paintbrush in my hand.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Beyond the Frame, a PAG podcast. To hear more episodes and to view the artist's works, please visit www.propellerartgallery.ca. Hosted by Doris Purchase, produced by Tracy Thomson, and recorded at the Orange Lounge Studio in Toronto. Also, the Propeller Art Gallery recognizes the presence of the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Huron-Wendat nations. We acknowledge we are hosted on land governed by Treaty 13, the Toronto Purchase, the Two-Row Wampum Treaty, and the Dish with One Spoon Treaty. We are committed to peaceably sharing and caring for the resources around the Great Lakes and operating the gallery on the principles of inclusiveness as we continue to exhibit art created by artists from all over the world. Thank you for listening.